Hey everyone, Harry here to talk about the opening arguments and beginning of evidence in the New York versus Donald Trump trial. The first thing to note, we're moving with dispatch, and that's obviously a concerted decision by Judge Juan Merchan. So the jury selection went much more rapidly than most people anticipated. And then even today, probably the biggest tell was that after the two openings, and then there was business to take care of, there was maybe a half an hour to go. A lot of judges would have said, fine, government will take your first witness tomorrow. Instead, they said, government, put your first witness on. And we heard for 20 minutes from David Pecker, whom I predicted would be the first witness. And my thinking was that they don't want to be starting with Michael Cohen in general. We'll get more to him, but he's a witness who, while they call him their tour guide, is problematic and will be subject to a bruising cross-examination. Pecker, by contrast, really grounds the story in this initial meeting in 2015, which we've heard before in broad sketches, but it was pretty arresting to actually hear the details. First, Pecker himself, former Trump buddy. In fact, their deal was to basically publish good things about Trump and trash other candidates against him, like Cruz and Carson and other people running for the Republican nomination. So they were pretty tight for a time, and you might have thought that he would be a slightly uncomfortable witness. He wasn't. He was a jocular, relaxed, almost to a fault witness. And the evidence that he provided was, it's just setting the stage. On the other hand, it's pretty sleazy and squalid. So it's this whole process of what he called checkbook journalism, which really means the take and kill stories. So they're setting a meeting, and that meeting includes, very importantly, we'd had some notion of it, but to really hear it confirmed and hear it in the evidence, that's what's happening in this trial. Things that one knew about are being driven home by strong testimony. And I think has a more sort of vivid emotional impact than people were counting on in advance. But anyway, the story all begins in a sense with a meeting that includes, among others, Michael Cohen, David Pecker, and Donald Trump. And it's basically Trump's meeting. And the whole purpose of it is to do this kind of catch and kill and put into place plans for really smothering bad stories about him, which, is not what you think of the press as normally doing, and amplifying bad stories about opponents. So just a flagrant kind of thumb on the scale by a fairly well-known, if kind of semi-legit outlet. All right, so that's where Pecker started, and he sort of sets the stage that then is going to lead. It's from that agreement that we then will learn about. Well, he will execute it with Karen McDougal, to whom he pays $150,000 to keep her story from coming into the light, and then $30,000 to Dino the doorman to keep a story, probably a false story, about Trump's having fathered a child with a housekeeper. But it's that is happening when the Access Hollywood tape, which the jury is going to hear the transcript of anyway, creates a huge crisis in the campaign. And it is on the heels of that, very much on the heels of that the Stormy Daniels episode kind of develops, and she comes forward with a threat of revelation of conduct that they think, given what's happened in Access Hollywood, will just totally tube the election. So we start with Pecker and that original agreement, and notice that all this stuff proceeds and is not part and parcel of the actual crime charge, which is the falsification of papers to camouflage the Stormy Daniels payments, but it's part of what the court is allowing the jury to hear. Okay, that's just the half hour of testimony. It's preceded by the opening statements by both the DA and the defense. the DA, pretty much plain vanilla, but solid, crisp, well rehearsed, but basically told the chronological story beginning with Pecker. One other thing about Pecker, by the way, that I wanted to note is he helps corroborate in advance Michael Cohen's testimony. That's going to be where already seems pretty clear a centerpiece is the cross-examination of Cohen. And they need to use Cohen, as they've said. He's the one guy who's got a 360-degree view on the whole scheme, but he's got a lot of warts as a witness, and so they're going to want to corroborate as much as possible. And Pecker does that prospectively. He's at the same meeting that Cohen will testify about. Others, like Kopix, will as well. Others, and also there'll be a lot of paper corroboration. But anyway, in the opening, the DA tells a pretty straight chronological story, but it's very much a story of election interference, very much along the lines with what I've laid out. So it builds to the point where Stormy Daniels comes forward, and it's a mortal threat to the campaign itself, which has just taken this huge hit in the Access Hollywood episode. So that's definitely the slant that they're going for, and the election interference as the real motivation for the whole payoff scheme to Stormy Daniels. Now, the defense, as a prosecution, you want to be crisp. Don't take too long. Tell your basic story and sit down. Maybe they did in this case anyway. Preview some possible difficulties, so it's coming from you, not from the other side. That's actually a whole sort of controversial theory that some people hold to, others don't. But they did that as well with Michael Cohen. And now comes the defense. And he's got two competent lawyers, but they took a stance with the jury that I think is a mistake and will hurt them, but maybe is a forced move because of their client. So in a case like this, where you're going to have Stormy Daniels come forward and testify, and then Karen McDougal testify, Trump has said in the public sphere that he never had sex with either of them. He's basically denied everything. Now, the obvious move for a defendant at this point for a lawyer would be to say, my client is a jerk, but he's not a criminal. And, maybe he had an affair and he shouldn't have, but that's not a crime. And the things they're actually charging him with, he doesn't have real intent and knowledge about. That would be your, an obvious kind of approach. Here, they didn't do that. They just took Trump totally at his word, totally innocent. And that means that his denials, I think, sex with the affairs themselves they're going to have to try to somehow push on. Again, it's not exactly clear how, by the way. Remember that if Trump doesn't testify, all they can do is, suggest on cross-examination that Stormy Daniels isn't telling the truth, and they'll try that, but she could well hold up. And it's one thing to say Michael Cohen isn't, but the way they've chosen to try the case, again, maybe because, Trump just won't abide the implicit criticism if they're harsher about it, is not just Michael Cohen, but Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Everybody is lying, and Trump is completely a paragon of virtue. I just don't think that's a very effective way, and it's going to fly with the jury. The other thing the defense did, and it's going to be trouble. It's very rare to draw objections during opening argument. It's just not, polite, for one. But they went beyond the pale several times and essentially misstated the evidence having to do with Michael Cohen. First, it shows they're desperate to dirty him up however they can, but they went too far, and there were 3 objections. And as a prosecutor, you're really taught, do not object in opening or closing statements unless it's really clear. But they objected 3 times, they were sustained 3 times. So that suggest a kind of push the envelope, aggressive approach that is, likely going to cause them to butt heads with a guy they don't want to butt heads with now that there's a jury in the box, and that's Judge Juan Merchan. If he really has the power to slap them around, even subtly, in a way that I think is driven home very strongly in front of the jury. And they're flirting with it now. It's not the kind of thing that matters when you're just arguing to a judge. With a jury in the box, it matters, and very much. Okay, so the first day, I think, solid by the prosecution and not very solid, and kind of an indication of a direction by the defense that is going to, is not auspicious for what they need to do. The jury, by the way, was quite attentive the whole way through. They took copious notes. Trump himself was in and out, as it were, the kind of demeanor he's had so far in this trial. But an attentive jury is another sign that the DA would be happy about, and the defense would be less happy about. They want the jurors not paying attention, who's just going to really not even think too carefully about it and insist on acquitting him, whereas the DA wants jurors to really think hard and deliberate and presumably understand their argument for why he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, that's just the first day of openings and evidence. Tomorrow they go only until 2. And then no court on Wednesday. And come Thursday, I actually hope to be there in the courtroom, and we'll give more sort of nuanced reports, including kind of the sorts of reactions and demeanor that you can only really see when you're inside a courtroom. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.